Thank you very much. Thanks everyone who has joined for chapter 5 of our series on generative AI and how it's going to impact business, life, our planet. We started this as a community initiative from a WhatsApp community called the Generative AI Community about 2 months back or 2.5 months back. We've had some really interesting people, some amazing conversations in the first 4 chapters. And a lot of you would have joined in earlier. We've seen a lot of repeat viewers, in fact, coming in, which is great. Today, I want to welcome you for chapter 5 of what we call the Afraid to Ask fireside chats, because it's about, everything you wanted to know about something but were afraid to ask. Last time, we had 2 amazing IT leaders, Sindhu and Jagdish Mitra, who had come in to talk about whether generative AI will disrupt IT and ITES. Today, we will continue in that same vein, perhaps talking of an even larger industry than IT and ITES, which is banking and financial services, and whether this tidal wave of generative AI is going to engulf it or rise or make it rise up, especially given that this industry is so much a part of our economy. As always, conversation is encouraged at the end. There's a chat box there where you can ask your questions. And the last 10-15 minutes or so, after about 25 odd minutes of chatting, would love to have your comments, questions, etc. Today, I'm very, very pleased to have with me an industry leader, co-student, and now I'm privileged to call him a friend, Sanat Rao. Sanat is the CEO of Infosys Finacle, which most of you would know is a market-leading company in core banking systems and other banking software, a wholly owned subsidiary of Infosys. He's also a full-time director at Edgeworth. Sanat brings along with him a wealth of experience, over 3 decades of it, in fact, both in international banking and in technology-led business transformations. Before he came in to Finacle, he was a vice president and senior partner at IBM Consulting in the UK, where in fact he's based now and where he's joining us from. Before that, he started his career in banking again in ANZ Bank, working both in India and Australia. Now, while this is his professional career, one of the things that I really admire about Sanat is his thirst for knowledge, his willingness and ability to learn new things. He pulled off an almost impossible trifecta by being an MD of a large global fintech company, which is Finacle. At the same time, completing his master's in Digital Anthropology from University College London, and doing his master's in AI Ethics and Society at the University of Cambridge, where we met. So, Sanat, great to have you here, and thanks for making the time to come in.
Thanks, Jaspreet, and thanks for that very kind introduction. As you said, we got to know one another at Cambridge, and as I've got to know you and I've understood you and the WhatsApp forum that you created for Gen AI, admire the way you've championed, what shall I say, the thinking and the creation of a community around things that are of great interest to us. And certainly this topic that we're going to discuss today, hopefully will generate a lot of excitement. So thanks for the opportunity.
Lovely. Now that the mutual flattery is over, Sanat, let us move to the questions. And I just wanted to start with throwing a little, if I may say so, stink bomb at you, okay, to kind of liven up the conversation as we start. So look, there has been a slew of reports and surveys and research on generative AI since ChatGPT came out 7 or 8 months back. One of the more respected ones is the one which Accenture brought out about a month or a couple of months back. And this was focused on how, what would be the impact of this technology on automating tasks and jobs in different parts of the economy. And as I was kind of looking through this report, the thing which struck me, one of the things which struck me is in the graph, which you can see on the slide, that your industry, the industry which you operate in, which is banking, and then by extension, insurance, capital markets, etc., that you can see here, are actually the most sensitive to the impact of automation, specifically by generative AI. And the moment one hears about automation and generative AI, one says, oh, jobs are going away. Okay, and so one side of it. I mean, there's obviously another side of it. So, I wanted to start with your opinion on what Accenture has said here. Whether you think that this is a technology which will do this kind of disruptive impact on the banking industry, and how do you see that playing out?
Sure. Well, like you rightly said, Accenture is one of the leading analysts who've come out with their report, and there have been a host of these that have been published in the last several weeks. I think, as you rightly said, the report does state that in the banking industry, just over 50% of the jobs could be impacted by automation. Now, I don't know the basis on which this is computed, but let us for a moment just assume that the figure is broadly directional. Right? If I'm not wrong, in the same report, they also talk about and use words such as jobs redesign, they talk about task redesign, they talk about reinvention of roles. But if you've noticed, they've stayed away from outright job losses. And there are several other reports. Bain Capital has come out with something, EY has come out with something else, McKinsey has come out, and everyone is sort of publishing reports simply because it's of great interest to everyone at the moment. But at least from what I've seen, I haven't seen any tangible data out there in public domain which is actually quantified job losses. So I think that's point number one, that while it's right to say that there will be a lot of automation, the point I'm making is that automation does not automatically mean job losses. I think if you look beyond the numbers, sure, I mean, some roles and tasks presently being done by human beings obviously will be lost to automation. I think, there's no denying that. And I don't think for a moment I'm sort of saying that there'll be no job losses. But if one goes by the other big prediction regarding Gen AI, which I think everyone has said in some manner or the other, it is that it could lead to what they expect to be an exponential increase in productivity. Now, I think there's certainly a huge opportunity in the banking industry, and productivity certainly is one of the very relevant themes in the industry today. And I firmly believe that, at least as far as the more progressive banks are concerned, and those that understand the potential of where and how these technologies can be deployed, I think they'll find a way to adopt and adapt. But let me just give you an example which is very current in the UK, where I live and where I'm based. As some of you may know, UK has experienced very high inflation, just under 9% at the moment. It had gone into double digits not too long ago. Just last week, I think it was middle of last week, the Bank of England raised the base rate to 5%, which is the highest in the last 15 odd years. Right? And there's a possibility of a further rate hike. Now, one of the big issues in the country today is regarding existing mortgages. A lot of people took out mortgages when rates were very, very low. They had fixed rate mortgages which are coming up for renewal this year, next year, and so on. And the question in the minds of people like you and I is, do you renew your mortgage? If you renew, do you renew it at a fixed rate? Do you convert it to a tracker? Do you change the form of payment? Do you move from an EMI-based mechanism to an interest-only mechanism? So, there's no one-size-fits-all approach clearly for everyone. And these are very relevant questions in the minds of people. Now, ChatGPT and LLMs of similar nature will not be able to answer this. They will need to call a bank, and they will need to speak to a mortgage advisor. And I think what these technologies will do is these technologies will be able to provide a host of information that the advisor may not otherwise have had, or which he might find a little clunky to access during the course of a conversation like you and I are having. which ChatGPT makes it much easier because they're able to collate information, they're able to collate a lot of textual information residing in different parts. They're going to look at the contracts that were signed previously and so on. So in my mind, I think, while I've maybe taken a very specific example here, in my mind, the banking industry and indeed everyone else is still in the process of discovering how these technologies will be embedded in our technology ecosystem, how they'll be used, where are the opportunities to use them. And therefore, I think it's not a surprise that none of the leading and respected analysts today have stayed away from quantifying job losses. So I think if I were to summarize, I'd say that yes, there will be certainly a huge impact on automation. Yes, there will be some amount of displacement, like it happens every time new technologies like this come in. But I firmly believe that there's enough opportunity for them to reinvent and to adapt. And mind you, let me just sort of end by one more point, Jaspreet. And I'm sure there are many people listening to this podcast, to this webinar, who are very familiar with the banking industry. See, the banking industry is an industry that still carries a lot of technology debt. Yeah. It's an industry
So may I interrupt you just for a second here,
Sanat,
because I was going to ask you this particular part in a subsequent question with a little. So if you allow me, let me just kind of frame something around what you're just talking right now. And I actually agree with you. I mean, what you said, that look, something like a new technology always has both sides. And what you mentioned from the jobs perspective, kind of gives further boosts up a claim that I often make that ChatGPT or generative AI will not take your jobs, but someone using it could. Yeah. So how you kind of use that, and that's what we need to take care of. Now, a different report, McKinsey this time, actually has kind of said the other side, as you rightly said. That they've said, in fact, that banking, retail, pharma are the three which would have the most advantage, could get the most advantage from this, for precisely some of the reasons you were saying. The legacy code conversion, which I will definitely want you to talk about. The customer operations, marketing, sales, other functions, etc. And they have identified 63 use cases actually across these 4 industries, which say that. Now, while there is no quantification, as you rightly said, Sanat, to kind of continue from what you were saying, and also as you talk to your customers across the world, banking customers, financial services customers, anecdotally, do you see your company or your customers starting to experiment with or use this technology?
So the answer is yes and no, Jaspreet. In the last, let's say, 2 or 3 months, while I've not been able to travel because of medical reasons, I've obviously spoken to a lot of banks and spoken to a lot of CXOs. And if I sort of just look back at the last 10, 15 years and the proliferation of digital technologies, cloud, blockchain, and everything else that's happened in the relatively recent past, I think there is this factor of FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. And certainly with the kind of excitement that GenAI has created in the last 3 months, which has really taken everyone by surprise, I think there is heightened FOMO at the moment. So I have not heard anyone saying that they are not finding out what GenAI can do for them. Sometimes it may be in an orchestrated capacity as an executive of a bank. Sometimes it may be purely in an individual capacity, because you want to be informed first as an individual and then see how you might deploy that in whatever role you're sort of carrying in the bank. So the short answer to your question is yes, everyone is trying to understand this better. Everyone is trying to see how it can be implemented. I think there's one other element that stands out from what I've heard. While there may be some confusion in the minds of some people of how GenAI fits with traditional AI, I think as people listen to more experts talking about it, as they read more about this, it seems fairly clear that GenAI will coexist with what I call traditional AI, right? So GenAI is not going to come and suddenly replace everything else. And the advantages of GenAI, as we know, are in some ways complementary to what traditional AI, does. So traditional AI, very good at number crunching, very good at predicting, very good at risk modeling, and so on. Gen AI, obviously, the advantages are around everything to do with language. So I think in some way there's a complementary nature to it. And I think people are finding out how this can complement AI technologies that are already deployed in your organization or any of the other digital technologies that are there, rather than completely replacing something else. So the answer to your question is yes, everyone's talking about it. Of course, there are use cases that are being experimented. I mean, you mentioned McKinsey had come out with 63. Well, every bank may not be necessarily talking about 63, but broadly speaking, whether it's in marketing, sales, whether it's in customer service, whether it's in a lot of internal use as well, training and product development. So I think there are areas where all of this is being talked about and silently being sort of piloted, if you like.
No, great. I mean, and as I talk to professionals across sectors, Sanat, you're right. There's actually a weird feeling of FOMO as well as a little jadedness combined with one more. We had people beating the blockchain drum. We had people beating the metaverse drum. Now people are beating the Gen AI drum. But on this one, there is far more FOMO, I agree, than on some of the others. In fact, I read a great, and the other thing is that, these use cases so far, and that's what I was looking to hear from you, seem to be common across industries, marketing related, customer service related, some efficiency, productivity, IT operations related. I read another report, a Bain report this time, had a wonderful quote saying that if ChatGPT is the iPhone, everyone is making calculator apps. We are still waiting for the Uber there, and I'm sure that that will come. Anyway, switching gears a little bit, not much, but a little bit, Sanat, and I wanted to share a quote again, this time by Gary Marcus, who's, as you know, is not the biggest optimist of generative AI. So, over the past few months, there's been a lot of talk of regulation. And I'm not touching ethics yet. We'll come to ethics after this, but which I definitely want to ask you, given our shared interest in it. But about regulation, and there's so much talk about regulation, everyone wanting, every country or territory looking to enact regulation, global regulation, etc. Now, banking especially is extremely regulation sensitive. And you as, again, a solutions provider to them, how do you see specifically banks, other financial services, thinking about this? Is this something which is holding them back? Are they waiting for it? Are they fearing it? Do they want it? What's your and your customers' view on regulation in this for this technology?
So I think, see, that's a very broad question. I think it has many different manifestations, Jaspreet. So let me just try and touch on a few of them. See, the banking industry is indeed the most regulated, but I'd like to sort of upfront say that it's a fallacy that more regulation comes at the expense of innovation. So if you go back to the past 10 years, and let's take cloud, for example, because I think in some ways, relative to Gen AI, cloud is obviously a lot more mature as a technology today. Go back 10, 15 years, there were many naysayers, who said that regulators would not allow moving of data to the cloud. Right? But if you see what's happened in the last several years and you see what's happening right now, right? Regulators have come out with guidelines, they've come out with, frameworks, they've come out with the do's and don'ts around data residency, security, and so on, as they should, right? After all, you're dealing with sensitive customer data and a lot of it. But this is to address risk, and it's not to stifle innovation. So I think we will go through a similar journey as far as Gen AI specifically and traditional AI is concerned. As we are aware, in all this hype that has been created around Gen AI, equally some of the big players, and Sam Altman is certainly one of them, and there are many others, who are also now openly talking about the need for regulation. Right? This is something that is completely unheard of, where in the past the feeling was that people who are building something new would not want to have regulation hampering them. Whereas today, I think people realize that regulation, and especially responsible regulation, can be the other side of the same coin. So I think regulation is required, and certainly in the banking industry, there will be regulation. And already we are seeing, different parts of the world talking about it. The EU is predictably, probably a little ahead of many of the other regions. So I think, regulation will be there. I don't necessarily believe that just because there will be regulation, it's going to stifle innovation. Now, I think if you look at Gen AI as a technology, and I'm not a technologist per se. I don't have a background in computer science or anything, so I'm talking in a slightly more generic manner. So Gen AI as a technology, excuse me, Gen AI as a technology is built on what is known as the next best principle, right? And, it's not likely to be seen as the most accurate or perfect, at least not at the moment. And you couple this with the most regulated industries such as banking, and then you have to wonder, are these two really made for each other? Now, while indeed there may be some tension between these two propositions, I suspect that banks that make a success out of this new technology are the ones who do not believe that Gen AI is an end in itself, but they rather see it as an important component within the larger software and process workflow ecosystem that resides in these banks. And as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, there's a huge amount of technology debt and technology footprint that is already there in the banking industry. So I think regulation will certainly come. I think it's good that even some of the big players are talking about the need for regulation. I don't believe that it'll stifle innovation. I think the fact that there are many players who've sort of taken on the opportunity to combat the opportunities out of Gen AI, very proactively, I think that's a good thing. It's a good starting point. I think regulation will be a moderating factor rather than a limiting factor.
No, I agree with you, Sanat. And in my conversations with CEOs, not only in banking, etc., but everywhere, or CXOs or their management, I do often say that sometimes regulation is taken as the best excuse, by companies and teams. I think no, we live in a regulated environment. We cannot innovate, but that isn't necessarily true. In fact, in India, where obviously you have roots in, and where I am right now, I think perhaps the maximum amount of digital innovation has happened in the financial services overall sector. Both from a government standpoint and from and under a regulatory regime, which is not necessarily the most liberal of them all, but it's happened. So I tend to agree with you, and I also think that I do agree with all the gods of AI that regulation would be a good thing, and there are different models being talked about, etc. Before I ask the next question to Sanat, possibly my penultimate question, I just wanted to urge any people in the audience, if they have any questions that they want to ask Sanat, please do start putting them in the Q&A box, preferably the Q&A rather than the chat box, though I'll look at both. So please do that, because then I'm going to hand it over to a few questions, hopefully from the audience. So Sanat, keeping to a similar vein, and this is where I want to talk about our shared interests in that sense. When both of us did this foolish thing of joining the course at Cambridge about 2 years back, there was no Gen AI. Okay, I mean, it was there, but it wasn't there in public imagination because ChatGPT, etc., hadn't happened. And at that time, I remember all of us thinking that possibly the horse has already bolted out of the stable door of AI, the regulation or the ethics horse in that sense. And now with Gen AI, the horse seems to be so far away that we can't even see it. But how do you think about, both as a business leader in this industry, and perhaps even as an individual, as a human being, about ethics specifically related to, bias, fake news, etc., plagiarism, etc., in generative AI? And are you an optimist or are you a pessimist around where this technology is going to lead us? It's a broad question, but I have kept it broad deliberately.
Sure. So it's a broad question, but let me start with a somewhat bold response. And my proposition is this, Jaspreet. Just as sustainability has now, eventually become a boardroom issue, I think the ethics related to technologies will also become a boardroom issue very quickly. by the end of 2024 or into 2025, which is barely, 18 months or so from now, I do believe that every bank and fintech will be talking about ethics related to deploying these powerful technologies. Now, many banks have large IT teams themselves. They're developing capabilities themselves. They're buying solutions and software off the shelf. They will need their teams to understand the ethical implications of doing or not doing certain things. Developers will recognize that it is not sufficient to just know programming languages and how to code and write algorithms. But it's equally important to ask the right questions so that what is developed is ethically correct. Mind you, ethically correct is different from perfect, right? And I'm making that distinction because, the world being what it is, it's never going to be absolutely perfect, but it needs to be ethically correct. I think just as today, banks are spending a lot of money training their staff as competition hots up and as more and more technologies become available. I foresee that in the next 18, 24 months, training related to ethics will become very, very prominent, both in the banking industry that's within the banks, as also with fintech and providers of solutions and software which are in the space. So I want to say that ethics is going to start occupying the kind of role that sustainability now has eventually begun occupying. And mind you, even sustainability has taken a long time, right? ESG as a principle has been around for many years, right? Sustainability has only now become a boardroom discussion. And I believe that ethics related to technologies, I'm not talking about ethics otherwise, a lot of organizations will have their guidelines and their principles around behavior and what to do in the office and how you interact with a colleague and how the do's and don'ts around personal behavior and so on. So the ethical guidelines, I'm talking specifically around ethics related to technology. So I believe that this will become a boardroom issue in the next 18, 24 months. I believe that money is going to be kept aside specifically on training related to ethics. And I think it's a matter that's going to receive a lot more attention, given that today it is, I'd say in some ways, paid lip service to. Now, as technologies become more powerful and regulators and indeed industry, cannot afford to ignore the need for discipline, what is the role that ethics can play? Very, very, very simplistically put, ethics is a discipline that explores how the world should be, understood, if you like, and how people ought to act, right? How are you and I expected to act in that way? And then, of course, there are different schools of thought around ethics. And, there may be listeners of this webinar today who have a background in philosophy, for example. They'll know that, there are different schools of thought related to ethics. And, they differ not only in terms of the kind of answers that they provide, but also in a more fundamental way in terms of the way you, formulate the basic questions about how you might understand the world. So I think in the banking business, questions related to fairness, questions related to transparency, privacy, bias, these are just a few of the issues that banks need to contend with. There are no right answers today. And certainly, if you take privacy and data, for example, the GDPR was a path-breaking, definition of what needed to be done. And, today you've got many different avatars of GDPR in different parts of the world. I think similar things will happen around ethics related to these technologies. And, I think the implications of that will be far-reaching and will be very significant. So I think the ethical implications of these developments are, very significant. I think biases in AI training have been a persistent concern that have been around various industries for a while. But I think the industry recognizes the need to address this, and the industry is responsible, has a sense of responsibility to ensure that, they ask the right questions and they treat this issue with the kind of importance and seriousness that I think it deserves. A long answer to your broad question.
So that, you know how complex a subject this is. And I don't think 2 years of doing this has really even scratched the surface. So
that's right.
So 3, 4, 5 minutes obviously is not enough. But a great insight in your answer that tech ethics / AI ethics is going to become as big or as important or as significant as ESG and be a part of boardroom discussions. I think that's that actually opens up various if I may say so, career opportunities for a lot of people, business opportunities, and could be a job that AI has created, therefore, rather than impacted negatively. So I had thought that I would ask you something else, but let me just. Even before I do that, I know that this is being streamed live on LinkedIn. And I would also urge, if any of the people on LinkedIn, if they have any question, they can put it on LinkedIn itself, and one of us will pick that up and bring it here. So let me move to, because we have a bunch of questions already, Sanat. So I'll give the audience it to the audience, and I'm just trying to. I mean, they are in the Q&A if you find something which is interesting, but otherwise I'm also looking at some which so a couple of times this question has been asked here, Sanat, and I think possibly because the questioners are from India. What it is saying is that, do you see a possible impact of AI or generative AI on digital payments? Any comment you might have there?
So it will. So if this question is coming with an India perspective in mind, and we know that the UPI is probably one of the most innovative and technologically significant breakthroughs that have happened in the last several years, right? And just you look at the volume of payments that are being done and the ease of making payments between individuals, between a vegetable seller and someone wanting to buy vegetables for 50 rupees, right? Everything can be very easily done with just a tap on your mobile phone. So I think in a space like that, Gen AI will certainly get used. Now, what are the possible use cases? I'm only doing some loud thinking here. I'm not necessarily an expert in payments. See, the payments ecosystem is a large ecosystem. It's not dominated by one player. Mind you, the UPI is a framework, right? And within the UPI framework, you've got some very big global players through their local entities. You've got a lot of local players beginning to come in. And mind you, the UPI and the payment framework is part of what people in India will be familiar as the India stack, right? It allows you to do a transaction in the midst of a very, very publicly available digital infrastructure that's residing. And for that, there has to be an exchange of information. For that, there has to be different parties interacting with one another. There has to be an ability to share information. Gen AI will certainly help there. Specifically in terms of the transactions, I'm not going to hazard a guess here, but I think it's still early days. I haven't seen any announcements from anyone of specifically saying what will happen. But I think, like we discussed earlier in the conversation, Jaspreet, these are still very, very early days, mind you. Even the 63 use cases that McKinsey has talked about, they're at a very high level, right? I haven't heard of any bank that has actually gone and put into production and said, look here, as a result of this, I've had this kind of a change or that kind of a change. So I think just by virtue of the importance of payments, and particularly digital payments and UPI in India specifically, and the fact that it's an ecosystem, I think there'll certainly be some impact that will come in.
Lovely. Two more quick questions from the audience, Sanat, and then we'll wrap up with a final question, single line answer question from me. But Visti Banaji, who's a friend, a TAS senior and an HR professional, actually asks a very interesting question. And he's saying, if AI is genuinely intelligent, shouldn't HR, rather than IT alone, also be involved in figuring out the ethical challenges that arise from its introduction? I certainly have a view, but first I'll give it to you, Sanat.
Sorry, what's the name of the person who asked the question?
Visti Banaji. Last question on the...
Oh, okay, I'm not able to see the questions. No, absolutely. Visti, I think it's a great question. And I think you've sort of said the second line of what I had alluded to in my previous answer, where I said that ethics will become a boardroom issue. See, moment it becomes a boardroom issue and it starts talking about and receiving the attention that I think it's going to receive, it's no longer an IT issue, right? Moment it becomes an issue for consideration, I think whether it's business, whether it's HR, whether it's IT, everyone needs to be equally involved in that. And I don't think it'll be an issue only for the IT department. Of course, the fact that AI technologies and Gen AI in particular is going to help in development of code, and it'll help in asking the right kind of questions. There's all this recent talk about prompt engineering and so on. All of that, there is an IT dimension to it, but moment ethics becomes a boardroom discussion, I think automatically HR and indeed even business, right? Why would the business teams in the bank be left to the side? Business are equally important, equally an interested party in terms of figuring out what the ethical implications and challenges are from its introduction. So I think you're absolutely right. It will not be just within the purview of IT. It'll be across all the different staff and support functions in an organization. That's a great question. Thanks.
No, I agree with what you said, Sanat, and I agree it's a great question. I think this question is already being asked at the CEO level, even not just CIO level or CHRO level in that sense, because this CEOs are recognizing this as a fundamental technology, but also which could have fundamentally different regulatory and ethical implications. And I pretty much believe what you said, that this will have to be a cross-industry thing. The IT department, in fact, might be the least involved. Okay? The others will be far more involved. We would all become philosophers.
Just let me sorry to interrupt. See, continuing on the same thread. See, I think that's a very healthy development. I'd be actually very worried if an organization, even after it began looking at ethics, if an organization said that it remains an IT issue. I think I'd be really worried about the way that the organization is approaching that, right? Ethical behavior has everything to do with doing the right thing. It doesn't matter what role you occupy. And to that extent, I think, like Visti rightly said, HR will be the department that sort of brings this together because it's people related. But, the other side of the coin to IT, which is business, I think business has a huge role to play here. And, I do believe that the responsible nature of the banking industry will actually foster the right kind of, involvement by all these different parties.
Yeah, much like compliance is no longer just a legal department issue.
Yeah, right? That's right. Yeah.
My last question from the audience, which is from the LinkedIn audience. In fact, there's a bunch of questions which the LinkedIn audience have asked, largely around regulation, some around fraud detection, some around Bloomberg GPT. But I'm just going to pick one at random, which actually is something which I also wonder about. And the question is that companies can't be working with customers' data using public Gen AI. What about privacy and GDPR? I think you have alluded to this, but maybe if you want to dwell on this a little bit.
Oh, that's right. Whoever asked the question, that's absolutely right. And I think today, in all the debate that's going on around Gen AI, and many of you will be aware that when ChatGPT got announced, there were countries that barred ChatGPT, right? Italy was one of the more recent ones. In Europe, for example, there was genuine questions around many aspects to it, including the ownership of data that gets used in these large language models, right? And a lot of the data is not data owned by the companies that are developing LLMs. They're obviously relying on data that's been produced from a whole host of people. They don't give credit to where they've sourced it from. They just give you the output of that. So I think the fact that there is concerns around this is not a surprise. What was the specific question, Jaspreet?
What you said. I mean, customers' data and therefore implications around privacy and GDPR.
Yeah. So I think to me, the most exciting thing about this is that the technological development, and we've now got ChatGPT-4, we've got GPT-4, and 5 will come out at some stage for sure. Whether it's a 6-month embargo that some of them talked about or not, I don't know. But
or the shortage of GPUs. They say it's basically shortage of GPUs.
That's right. Yeah. I think the fact that concurrently there is an equally strong, call for regulation to be quickly sort of, formulated. I think to me that is probably the most significant development today, and therefore I remain very, very positive that these things will be done in the right manner.
Super, great. We are almost at the end of our time. We are 40 minutes through the conversation. Didn't even notice how the 40 minutes flew. So thanks a lot for that, Sanat. But I'm not going to let you leave without a last question, which I ask actually everyone who's there, and I never tell people that I'm going to ask this.
Wow, what is this now?
But the only condition here is that you have to reply in a yes or no. Or maybe 2-3 more words, so this is not a long answer. So do you think that in the next 5 to 10 years, the CEO of Finacle be a humanoid?
Wow, I never thought of that.
Please don't tell me that the CEO is already a humanoid.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, with ChatGPT and all the stuff that's floating around, you don't know whether the images are genuine. But seriously, could this role be played by a humanoid? Theoretically, yes. Practically, no. And I say this for 2 reasons. One is that I think we are still some distance away from humanoids and machines replicating the marvelous human brain that all of us have. Secondly, I don't think a humanoid is yet capable of asking the right questions that we humans do. And again, I go back to that mortgage example that I gave you earlier in this conversation, just breathe. I don't think a humanoid is, or any machine is today capable of addressing that mortgage example. That it has to be a human that is augmenting these technologies for their support. So I would say that rather than being replaced by a humanoid in future, I'm more likely to be replaced by a human being who's better at and more adept than me in understanding and leveraging AI technologies. So the threat is not from replacing a human by machines, but from replacement of humans by other human beings who are more capable at augmenting their inherent human strengths with AI-related capabilities. And certainly, all of us, whether we don't have a engineering background or not, I mean, if we say that we don't want to be informed about what AI can do for us, we'd be living in cuckoo's land.
Absolutely. And I think this is the great message that I wanted to leave with everyone, that we need to embrace this. We need to embrace this, whatever educational background we are, age we are, profession we are, because this is going to be as impactful as in the internet or search or one of these or the iPhone for that matter. And we cannot say that we are not going to do without those. Though, by the way, I've been told that the CEO of Twitter, Tesla, and SpaceX is a humanoid. But keeping that aside, thank you very much, Sanat, for joining us. Thanks to the audience, especially who have come in both on LinkedIn as well as on the Zoom link itself. We've had a large number of people, and I know that going forward, we have more people watching this on LinkedIn and other platforms where this will be live and it will be posted. We'll also be requesting Sanat to put it on his platform too. Even at that time, if you have any comments, questions, please do leave them there, and both of us would be very happy to engage as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Can I just say something?
Please.
So, as you and I have often discussed, we share a shared interest in things around ethics of technologies. And for some of you who may have seen my profile on LinkedIn, I read a lot and I write a lot about anthropology, digital anthropology, and the correlation between human behavior and digital technologies. So would love to engage with you through LinkedIn as a platform, ask questions. There's a lot more to be said on some of these related topics. Happy to connect and learn from, I'm sure, the rich perspectives that many of you bring to the table. Because these are still early days. I mean, Gen AI is still at a very, very early stage, and I think there's a lot more excitement ahead of us.
That's a great invitation, Sanat. If I would really urge the audience, if I was you, I would jump onto that invitation to engage with someone like Sanat, who has this vast experience. Plus, as I told you, all these other facets around ethics, around digital anthropology, etc. And I'm sure you'll have an interesting conversation. Thanks again, everyone coming in. We will meet again in about 25 days to 30 days from now. My next guest and what we would be talking of will be posted very soon on LinkedIn, Twitter, and all the groups that we all engage in. Thanks, and thanks again, Sanat, to come in. Look forward to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jaspreet. Bye.